Hey everyone, welcome back to 51%'s Crypto Research Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Shaughnessy. Today on the podcast, I had Wietse Wind. Hope I didn't mess up your name on the podcast. He's an XRP developer and the creator of the Xrp Tip Bot. It's a tip bot that allows users to tip each other using XRP on social media platforms like Twitter. The reason why I wanted to have Wietse on is because Ripple and XRP generally get joined together, where people think Ripple and XRP, the cryptocurrency, are the same thing when in fact they're very different. While I have my own views on Ripple and XRP, I wanted to have Wietse on to let us know how he's building on the cryptocurrency and what he's doing to build beyond Ripple the company. It was an interesting conversation. Wietse gets into why he's building on XRP, what he's doing, why he believes it's a great cryptocurrency to build on, and a lot of other developments that he talks about. We also get into a lot of the problems with XRP and Ripple that have been pointed out in the media, and he addresses a few of them for us. Also, I just wanted to let our listeners know that we upgraded our audio quality system to make for a better podcast. And I also wanted to point our listeners to 51pct.io, where you could find our in-depth research report on Ripple and XRP right now. 51pct.io for the report. With that, here's my conversation with Wietse. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Tom Shaughnessy, and today I have on Wietse to the podcast. Wietse is a programmer and a widely followed XRP advocate. He's also the creator of the Xrp Tip Bot. And with that, how's it going, Wietse?
Fine, thanks.
I hope I didn't botch your name too badly.
Well, no, not really. It's Wietse.
Wietse.
But it's a difficult name, especially internationally. Yeah.
Yeah, no, of course. Well, tell us how you got started in crypto and your background.
Okay, well, how far do you want me to go back?
Maybe not childhood. Maybe just when you got started crypto.
That's somewhere around 2010, 11. Of course, Bitcoin wasn't much else around by then. And I did some mining on my home computer, nothing really interesting, looked into the technology and decided to leave it at that. And then it wasn't until 2016 when I saw an interview with David Schwartz, Joel Katz, the Ripple CTO. I thought it was kind of interesting, so I looked into the technology, of course, and I noticed the technology was really easy to get started with. If you're like a web developer or someone who programs in his spare time, knows some JavaScript, stuff like that, you can just get started in a few lines of code. So, that got my attention, and I kept on doing that, like coding, sharing code, open source, creating XRPL projects. And I'm doing that, almost full time now.
So Wietse, why are you so enamored with XRP over other cryptocurrencies? I mean, is there any specific attributes about it that you like, or, what drew you in, or why do you love XRP over every other crypto?
Mostly because of the way the technology is set up. From the perspective of a hobby web developer, or even a serious team of developers trying to develop real world applications for consumers or small businesses, I think a few things are really important for both the developers and the users. It needs to be fast, it needs to be cheap, it needs to be easy to implement the technology in apps, but also in browsers. And it shouldn't be required to run this whole this big server with all ledger information. You should be able to do that, of course, because if you want to run the entire blockchain and verify everything that's stored in the blockchain, you should be able to, but it isn't necessary. And this setup, which is really the core of Ripple or XRP, the company Ripple, the way they created their software allows you to both run a full history node and or a smaller node with just the most recent ledgers. And you can still do everything you want. You can fetch all the recent transactions. You can also submit transactions. And even if you don't want to run your own server and maintain all the infrastructure, you can use one of the publicly available servers.
Got it. So the crux of why you love XRP, if I'm just before we move on, just so I just could zoom out a little bit to understand it. So you don't have to download the whole history of XRP's blockchain to interact with it, is what you're saying, and that separates it from other cryptocurrencies?
Exactly. And then it's also the way you can communicate with this network, with your own server or one of the public servers. You can use WebSockets, and WebSocket support is available in any web browser, on desktops, on smartphones, which makes it really easy without any dependencies to just connect and start reading or sending messages, transactions, etc.
Got it. That's interesting. So, I mean, have you experimented with, say, Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, or other cryptocurrencies before you found out about these benefits? Or
well, of course, with Bitcoin back in the day, so many years ago. And of course, there are other cryptocurrencies, other blockchain technologies that have some of the features I just described. But I believe on the XRPL, on the XRP ledger, they all come together in a great way. It's easy to set up, it's easy to maintain, it's easy to get started, and it's fast and cheap. I mean, we're talking about settlement within 4 seconds. That's the kind of time a consumer is willing to wait for confirmation.
Got it. That's interesting. So you're talking a lot about the use cases for businesses and people. I mean, do you think about these? You obviously think about these use cases separate from the use cases Ripple sees, which is international money transfers, remittances, stuff like that. Do you think that they could both coexist, or do you think that it's just two different baskets of use cases? You know, what's your take there?
Well, I think the technology, like the XRP ledger and all the software that it runs on, can be used for multiple purposes. So while Ripple, the company, is working on banks, international money transfer, remittance, settlement, etc., I think and of course they're completely focused on doing that, and they're probably doing it well. And well, they sure are doing a better job than some other companies or technologies in this ecosystem. But in the meantime, we as a community members or companies or whatever can focus on other use cases using the same technology. So yeah, they can coexist, and I think the technology they created can help both or any use case regarding the transfer of value in a cheap and fast way.
That's interesting. So, I mean, everybody talks about XRP and they basically talk about Ripple because Ripple's basically the champion of the cryptocurrency and that they're the ones using it the most, putting out updates, et cetera. But you're actually an interesting guest because you're using the currency outside of Ripple to build applications. So before we go back to what Ripple's doing, let's talk about your side of things, how you're actually using the cryptocurrency. You just released, well, it didn't just release, I just found it. That's a big difference. But you have Xrp Tip Bot, which is an application. Tell us about the Xrp Tip Bot.
Well, I think somewhere in October, November 2017, so almost a year ago. Of course, I was already programming and integrating with the XRP ledger, and I published a few small pieces of code, open source on GitHub, and then I decided to do something with it. And of course, Tipbots already existed. I believe at Reddit there were already a few Tipbots being used or published as a proof of concept. And I decided to make one on the XRP ledger. And I published it in November or December last year on Reddit. And then in January, I added Twitter. And then a few months later on Reddit. And well, the community kind of got started tipping each other. So I kept on developing, and I believe by now over 70,000 tips are sent, almost 100,000 XRP. So that's quite a lot. And then 2 weeks.
All being sent on your. That's all being sent through your tip bot.
Yeah.
100,000 XRP per day or total?
Oh, total.
That's phenomenal. So that's about, what is that, 50 grand?
Yeah.
That's great success for, I mean, you said, I think you had over 30,000 visitors to the site too.
Yeah, I believe we're at 50,000 unique visitors a month now.
Wow. So, I mean, I guess just run us down. I mean, how exactly does it work? Like if I want to send you a tip on Twitter with XRP, the cryptocurrency, using Twitter and the tip bot, how would I do it and how hard is it?
It's really easy, actually. And the fun part is all you need is some balance, of course. You can get it either by depositing some XRP or receiving tips from another user on social media. And let's say you receive your tip from another social media user. You don't even have to log into the tip bot. You don't have to register. It's already, your balance is already linked to your Twitter account. So you can just immediately start spending it on Twitter by just using the tip bot syntax in your tweets, which is basically an amount with a plus sign in front of it and a mention of the tip bot.
That's awesome. So basically, you send XRP that you already have to the tip bot. You set up an account on the xrptipbot.com. And then within Twitter itself, you just enter a few extra phrases and you're able to send and receive tips.
Yeah, that's it. Well, you're already, like, every Twitter user, every Reddit user, and every Discord user on the world is already able to receive them. There's no need to set up an account. Your balance your balance will just be registered to your social media handle.
Oh, so only one side has to set up an account.
You only have to set up an account to fund it or to withdraw to your own wallet.
Oh, I got it. So if you want to tip me, I don't need an account. You have your account set up and you could tip me and it'll just go right into wherever I hold my balance.
Exactly.
Wow, that's interesting. So I guess, I mean, are you ever concerned that the XRP Tip Bot account itself could become like a honeypot for hackers, or how do you think about security and safety there?
Well, of course, I have set up a hot-cold wallet model where the funds are kept safe in the cold wallet if the hot wallet balance exceeds a certain level. And, well, of course, I keep my system secure. Some community members were kind enough to do some penetration tests. And, well, no issues there. And yeah, of course, it's going to be a problem if, let's say, you lose access to your Twitter account. Let's say someone is able to log into your Twitter account, or you leave it signed in on a public computer and someone uses it. Well, bad luck. So, well, don't put too much XRP. It's not a wallet. Just keep some XRP on there. It should be fun, not like a custodian platform.
That's awesome. So how much does it cost to send XRP to somebody else? I guess it might be easier to think like in dollars terms. So if I want to send like $1 to you, I mean, how expensive is it?
0.0000001 XRP is the minimum amount.
So it's free.
Ledger. Yeah, it's free.
Okay, so that's way cheaper than sending Bitcoin, right?
Yeah. So yeah, and that's if you're talking about creating applications for consumers or small businesses or whatever, stuff that Ripple isn't doing, you have the advantage using their technology that in 4 seconds you will be sure your transaction is processed and cannot be reverted, and it will only cost you, well, something way beyond the comma, way behind the comma in XRP to send the value to someone
That's
else.
Awesome. So what's the future of the XRP Tip Bot? I mean, is it just growth from here, or do you think that, I mean, in my mind, you could enable some cool applications on here. Like, why don't I tip somebody for a link or a blog post or something like that?
Yeah, well, actually, the fun part is that other community members, other developers are already developing applications like that, and they integrate their tools and applications or browser plugins with the Tip Bot account from the users. So it's becoming kind of a platform. And from here, well, we launched a native app for iOS and Android 2 weeks ago. So this means real live tipping by just scanning a QR. So bars or restaurants could just put up a QR and people can scan it with the app and send a tip. It's still for fun, but of course, well, you can imagine some serious applications or use cases going live. But it's still a hobby that got out of hand. It's still fun. There's no business model. The community tips me to keep the servers running, and that's going great so far.
Well, it's a hobby that got out of hand in a good way.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, totally. So, it's great to have you on because, as I said, you don't talk to a lot of people that are building on XRP outside of Ripple. So I'd love to switch gears, talk about Ripple you probably do because you're in the community, but to be honest, I don't see much of it.
Well, you probably saw some tweets from or about Coil.
Coil's the smart contract programming language built on XRP?
No. Coil is a startup with founded by a few by now ex-Ripple employees, like the previous CTO, and a few really smart developers. And they are building a platform for donations, flat fee donations for content creators based on ILP, which is using XRP.
Got it. Yeah, I think I confused Coil with Codius, I believe.
Yeah, well, the same guys made it. So
okay, and those guys were actually used to work at Ripple, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, interesting. So, how do you, as a developer building on XRP, how do you think of Ripple? Because, let's be honest, Ripple's one of the most successful cryptos, or not cryptos, but one of the most successful crypto-based companies in attracting real partnerships, and they're solving a real problem, which a lot of cryptocurrencies aren't yet. But there are significant questions about them. The most prominent one is adding XRP, the cryptocurrency, to the RippleNet system only reduces payment costs by an extra basis point or two. And that's from their own marketing materials. So what do you think about, how XRP plays into Ripple's products here?
Well, it's kind of hard for me to say anything useful about that because it's not really where I'm focused on. Of course, I read some stuff, I watch some videos, I do some research. I feel the blog posts by the community member named Hodor are really interesting. So, of course, I read them, all his blogs. But I don't really have an opinion on, their business model and what they're doing and how they're doing it. I feel they're doing a great job, especially when you compare it to other players in this ecosystem, in this blockchain cryptocurrency world. But I can't tell. I don't know. Let's play devil's advocate here. Let's say that Ripple ends up being a horrible company and they go under or something. Would that change your mind about XRP, the cryptocurrency? No, not the cryptocurrency. It's just a name for a token on a piece of technology software. But so for me, it's about the network, like a decentralized network, the way it operates, how you can run your own server, the code that lets you run a server. And even if Ripple would disappear tomorrow, I believe we would still be able to keep the network running, and all the advantages like price, security, speed, stuff like that would still be there. So for me, I would sure hope I would be able to stay in contact with some of their employees, the technical guys. I have nice chats with sometimes. But no, for me personally, nothing would change. I still think their technology can be used for many, many different things, and it would really solve real world problems. Awesome, that's interesting. So I guess going back to XRP, because that's your main focus. A lot of larger institutions and players will come out and say, hey, XRP is being used by Ripple, so there's no use for retail investors to hold it because this is for remittances, this is for real life transfer or international money transfers, etc.
But a lot of the focus on XRP has been, honestly, let's get this in the hands of consumers. Let's get this on exchanges. But what you're saying is you're actually showing a real life example of why retail investors should hold XRP, because you're using it to allow people to tip each other.
Yeah, and maybe in the future some other use cases as well. I don't know, but I'm not really sure in the long term if people are actually going to pay each other in any cryptocurrency whatsoever. I mean, I think blockchain cryptocurrencies in the long term, of course, now it's all exciting and there are investments opportunities and there are new technologies to learn and to use and to implement. I think in the long term for the consumers, like the mass of the people, I mean, they don't really, especially locally, they don't really have a problem. I mean, my mother wouldn't use cryptocurrency. She just uses her bank card and is able to pay for whatever she wants to buy. And if she loses her card, she wants to go to some place that can give her a new card. So in the long term, I think cryptocurrency, blockchain, stuff like that, it will mean easier, faster payments and probably streaming payments and all kinds of new business models based on things like that. Especially the streaming payments are really interesting. And of course, you need some kind of cheap and fast technology to be able to implement stuff like that. But in the long term, I think it will be a device to transfer value under the hood, and people will just see their own local currency and they will just be able to send value fast and cheap to someplace.
That's super interesting. And, I have to ask, I mean, one of the problems with sending cryptocurrency between people, paying for goods and services, paying expenses, is obviously the volatility of it. And Bitcoin's the same price it was last year, which is a hilarious joke. I mean, it's been very volatile in the period in between that. But, if Xrp Tip Bot, continues its great growth here, how do you handle basically the volatility problem? Do you think that there's a way that you could convert XRP into the person's own currency right as it's sent so that there's no volatility? Or how do you think about this?
Well, for the Xrp Tip Bot, I think the people that are using it are okay with the volatility because they are using XRP. One XRP is one XRP. If you're looking at, let's say, mass adoption, which of course wouldn't be the case with Xrp Tip Bot because it's a project for fun. But let's say any other project with, Coil is a good example. I mean, they are using XRP under the hood on ILP for micro donations and small payments to content creators or donations. Maybe ILP is not a good example because it will be able to convert currencies on the ILP network. But the XRP ledger can use the decentralized exchange on the XRP ledger to convert currencies. So you can convert XRP to IOUs in your own currency and the other way around. So let's say you're a small business today. You want to accept XRP in your physical store. And then when someone pays in XRP, you want to immediately convert into your own currency. That would be euros over here or USD or whatever, anywhere else in the world. It just takes 4 seconds. It's an on-ledger transaction. There are several players that are offering their IOUs, and some of them, at least I would trust them. They're operating for quite some years in this space, and I've been able to deposit and withdraw fiat money several times. So let's say Bitstamp or GateHub. They have on-ledger fiat currency pairs, and you can exchange it based on offers that are already present on the XRP ledger in 4 seconds for a few drops. And then you exchange the XRP you just received into any currency issued by like an exchange you trust. And you can keep it in this currency and withdraw using your SEPA bank account or whatever. Whenever you like.
That's super interesting. That definitely solves a key problem there that we just talked about. That's interesting. So I guess switching gears while I have you, as a developer, you have to decide, what cryptocurrency you want to build on. And I think decentralization is a key question you definitely asked yourself a few times, without a doubt. I mean, how do you think about decentralization with XRP and, basically the security and making sure that all this value is kept in the hands of the people? Because I think there's some concerns because Ripple controls the list that chooses the nodes that are accepted in the network, I believe, the UNL list. And then there's also the fact that it's just there's not as many nodes as something like Ethereum. So it's not as decentralized. How do you think about decentralization when you're building?
Well, of course it's important, but I think you can prove that it's really decentralized by now. I mean, Ripple controls the UNL, but every node operator can configure his or her own list. So it's more like a default setting than the one and only truth. Of course, most node operators will stick to the standard, probably. But then again, if you look at the hosts or the nodes on the UNL, most of them, way over 50%, are nodes operated not by Ripple. I mean, I run a full history node and a validating node, which is on the UNL. And which way directionally is this going? I mean, is it that Ripple's, their UNL list is gaining less prominence or more prominence? And just so the listeners know, Ripple puts out a list of default nodes to run the consensus for the system. Well, I mean, which way directionally is this going? Yeah, for every 2 non-Ripple operated nodes, they're removing one of their own from the list, and they're doing this at quite a high rate.
That's interesting. So how long has that been going on?
Well, quite some months. I'm going to check my screen. I don't know.
That's okay. As long as I didn't know if it was a new event, or I believe it's been a few months old. I just didn't know if it was a long-term initiative. That's interesting. So basically, you're not concerned at all with the concerns about Ripple controlling the currency at all?
Well, they are not controlling the currency. They are the key contributor to the source code, of course, and they publish a UNL, but you're free to pick your own UNL and publish your own UNL. And if you can convince others to use your UNL, well, that's fine.
Got it. So, I mean, you got to see this a lot in the media, though, right? I mean, you have to see all the tweets and news about Ripple controlling XRP. So in your mind and based on the data you've given us, you feel that this just isn't true?
It isn't true. And actually, I made a website, fudbingo.com. FUDbingo.com, where I debunked most of the bullshit that's going around on the internet.
Oh, that's interesting. I got to check that out, and people could obviously visit that. I'm looking at the account right now. It's pretty cool. No, it's interesting. What's the most contentious? What's an item that you can't really prove that you think might be up in the air?
Let me see. I'm going to check the tiles on the website right now myself.
One of my favorite tiles on the website is the XRP community members are bots.
Oh, well,
you're definitely not a bot.
No, it's hard to prove, but I actually met quite a few of them at a few meetups or online, and I'm in a few Slack or Discord or DM groups. Some of them really. Some of them are almost always online, but I'm sure they just sleep less. They're not.
I'll ask you one of mine that I don't see on the site. I mean, what's the financial incentive to run a validator? And just so the listeners know, I mean, if you run a mining node on Ethereum or Bitcoin, you decentralize the network by increasing redundancy, and you get paid block rewards and fees to do so. Why would somebody want to run a node on Ripple or on XRP considering they won't be compensated?
Probably because they believe in the technology and believe that one day they will be able to do something commercially with the technology. So just to support the network.
Got it. So kind of like what you're doing now.
Yeah, probably.
Got it. All right, cool. Yeah, I'm looking at the site too. I guess one of the questions is some people say that part of the chain is missing, like the first 30,000 blocks or something like that. What's the whole argument there?
add one thing about the previous question about what's the incentive. If you operate if you mine on Ethereum or Bitcoin, it will be really expensive. I mean, your power bill will be off the charts. So you probably need financial incentive. Operating a Ripple validator isn't actually that expensive.
What is it? What do you think it is? Like, let's say I want to run a Bitcoin Ethereum, like real rough numbers here. Do you think it's like half the price or a quarter of the price?
Oh, way less. You can run a really stable, really secure Ripple validator that would be able to be part of the UNL list for, well, I think $100 a month.
Wow, yeah, that's definitely cheaper. So, I guess the argument then becomes what happens under proof of stake. I mean, then it might be a different argument, but that's different economics.
Yeah, so it's well, personally, I don't really need a financial incentive to operate the node.
Well, to be honest, I mean, you have a financial incentive is the tip bot. I mean, you have a business model around it, which is great.
Well, there's not really a business model. I don't make money with the tip bot, and I don't intend to. So,
hey, but in the long run, I'm building it because you never know.
Of course, in the long run, I'm sure I'll be able to build something that will have a business model. So
yeah, no, well, I mean, while I have you, I really wanted to keep going with a few more questions on building XRP outside of Ripple. You talked about Coil, you talked about Codius. I mean, what are some of the other, great projects being built on XRP outside of Ripple? And, it might be Codius. I don't know. We might have already mentioned it, but what do you think here?
I think there's one project, and of course I'm biased because I I worked on the project. But I think there's one thing that's really interesting. It's not really being used yet, but I think it has a lot of potential. It's the combination of the XRP ledger because of the speed, settlement times, etc. And ILP, Interledger, and the Internet of Things, and then especially streaming payments power. Or parking meters or stuff like that. I think that's really interesting and is also solving a real world problem. And think about streaming video or music and pay per second or even per millisecond, almost without fee. Yeah, that's really interesting.
And I mean, one of the prominent projects being built on XRP is Coil. We mentioned that it's used to pay content creators for their work using XRP. I mean, how do you balance this in your head with like something like Brave browser, which has their cryptocurrency to pay publishers for their work using their cryptocurrency BAT? Do you think that the projects on XRP are innovating faster than the competition, or is there anything unique about them?
Well, at least more open. And I think this is really important for adoption in the long run, and for to attract developers and to attract other use cases and business models. I mean, what Coil is doing right now will be using open standards that will be available in all browsers and on different platforms. And because it's using ILP, in the near future, you will be able to just use your own currency. Maybe your bank will run a connector on ILP, so you can pay in your own currency, and the other party, the recipient will just receive it in his or her currency, and the network and the browser will handle all the difficult stuff.
So just to zoom out, what you're saying is, for the listeners, is that these projects are building on XRP and are using the XRP currency. Projects like Brave are building on Ethereum, but they're also using their other currency, so it's a friction point. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Of course, ILP doesn't necessarily use the XRP ledger. I mean, there are a few guys, their company is called Strada, is currently developing Ethereum connector for ILP, which means you can send Ethereum and receive XRP over ILP. In really small amounts, streaming payments. But of course, you will use the cheapest and fastest technology in the long run. So I think even while ILP is really open, and we'll see probably lots of other connectors and cryptocurrencies added to the network, I think there's a really good chance that XRP will be used.
That's interesting. So I guess just, what do you think are the most prominent advancements moving forward? I mean, is there anything you're looking for in XRP over the next year? Any major announcements? I mean, everyone that follows Ethereum is talking about Serenity and Ethereum 2.0 right now. I mean, what are the upgrades to XRP or advancements that we should look out for?
Well, they're upgrading the consensus algorithm technology. I don't know when, but that's interesting. It will lower the ledger close times. So we'll go even lower than 4 seconds. And it will probably add some stability. So, yeah, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. And my last question for you, Wietse, is, as a developer, you're building outside of Ripple and you're building on XRP, which is interesting and awesome. I mean, how do you, in your mind, when you look at Ethereum where there's, over 2,000 dApps built on it, how do you put those together? Like, why not just build on Ethereum? I know we talked about the faster and cheaper settlement times and everything as a payment, but do you ever think about, hey, there might be a larger community over here with more dApps that I could integrate with and build on, or is that not really a concern for you?
It's not really a concern. I think the smart contract dApps, some of them are already available on Ledger. I mean, multi-sign is already available on Ledger. Payment channels like the Lightning network, but better and faster, already available on Ledger. Rekeying available on Ledger. Messaging in transactions already available on Ledger. So lots of things don't need smart contracts or dApps on the XRP Ledger. And there are a few new additions that are under review or can be voted for by validators that will probably go live someday. And then if you're looking at smart contracts, I think Codius will be really interesting. And Codius uses ILP for streaming payments to pay for the infrastructure and to allow you to decentralize your smart contract by deploying it to multiple hosts and using multi-sign or technologies like that. So I think it's actually kind of interesting to see how it will develop in the XRP and the ILP ecosystem.
Another last question for you, just to go back to a previous one we skipped over because we were busy in our conversation. Some people talk about part of the XRP chain missing. I think it's something like the first 30,000 blocks.
30,570.
What's the response to that?
Yeah. Well, the ledger headers are actually missing, not the transactions. So you can still fetch the transactions, and you can still see what happened. And of course, there are only 30,000 ledgers, and I believe the ledger close time was 10 seconds by then when they started. So it's not a great period of time with missing headers, but you can still fetch the transactions, and you can still see the balances from the first ledger available after the 32,570 ledgers missing. It was due to a systems crash. So they were just using this new technology, and it crashed, and they just restarted it. And then, well, what the heck? And they probably never imagined that years later this would be the ledger they would use for their projects, for production, for whatever. So it doesn't bother me. If you look at I'm not really sure about the numbers. I can find them for you if you'd like. But I believe by the time the missing ledgers are passed, if you scan the blockchain, if you get the first available ledger, we're talking about 100 available accounts, wallets with balance.
How much time do you think went by with this? I mean, I'm just like you said, so 30,000 blocks times 10 seconds divided by, 86,000 seconds a day. Is that what it is? So it's like 3 or 4 days. Is that right?
Yeah, it's not much.
Okay, interesting. Well, Wietse, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. Thanks so much for giving us your take on XRP and what you're building.
Okay, well, thanks for having me.
Thanks everyone for tuning into the podcast. Please rate and review the podcast, help other people find it, and visit 51pct.io and enter your email for our latest full research report on MakerDAO.